Welcome to the Female Stoic podcast. My name is Stephanie Poppins, and I am an advocate for literary empowerment. That means I believe the examples set by the literary masters can broaden our life perspective, create increased self-awareness, and empower us to overcome the obstacles we encounter here in the 21st century. By listening and referring what we hear to Stoic philosophy, we can foster a strong sense of self and navigate the world more effectively. This podcast takes the form of both discussions and meditations. And if you like what you hear, you might consider looking me up on my socials, where I post empowering videos every day. Or you may like my classic audiobooks and original stories available on my website, newworldbooks.uk. Happy listening. Hello and welcome to the Female Stoic podcast. Today we are considering the role of the three fates in Shakespeare's Macbeth and relating this to the three fates in Stoicism. Then we will consider the concept of fate and indeed how this can be related to our lives. But before we do, I would like to draw your attention to my new cozy crime audio drama dropping next week on Insight Timer, entitled Tuppence Stern and the Skipping Rope Scandal. So Tuppence Stern, if you don't know much about me, I used to be a high school teacher and I actually wrote this series while I was teaching. So I was in this room 201, and I was responsible for teaching all those children who, for one reason or another, just couldn't make it in a traditional school setting. So I was in a traditional school, but they would come out of their lessons and come to see me. And there was an understanding that in room 201 they could be themselves. So the lights were dimmed, it was more relaxed, and I took them through the lessons on a one-to-one basis, and it worked. The most disaffected kids actually really excelled at their exams. And one of the lessons I taught was English literature. I taught English language and literature. Literature covered Macbeth, the play. And if you don't know the story of Macbeth, that's how this ties in with this theme today and also with Tuppence Stern, because Tuppence Stern is a teacher. So she's an amateur sleuth, but she's also a teacher who works in this room 201 and who teaches English literature. So it's semi-autobiographical. And as I say, that's tying in with today's podcast because Macbeth, one of the plays I taught, is a play about ambition and the love of power that can destroy someone and those around them. If you don't know the story, while returning from a battle victory, a powerful lord meets three witches, so he is the conquering hero. And he's coming back from the battle and he's on top. The play starts with him up, if you like, as successful as a man can be. Then he meets these three witches who predict he will or can be the King of Scotland, which is huge. It turns his head. He goes home and he tells his wife of the witch's predictions, and she encourages him to murder the current king, King Duncan, who is staying with them as a guest. After Macduff, a local Scottish nobleman and a dedicated subject to King Duncan, discovers this murder, he tells King Duncan's sons to flee the country, and this leaves the way clear for Macbeth to become king. But of course, Macduff seeks revenge. He has to avenge the killing of his king. Now, Macbeth has a friend called Banquo, and he becomes suspicious of what his friend's done, so Macbeth kills him too. It's quite a bloody tale. And at the same time, down in England, Duncan's eldest son and Macduff plan to invade Scotland and win back the throne. Lady Macbeth, who has said to her husband, go ahead with the murders, and in fact encourages him, then feels so guilty she kills herself. And then as Macduff's invasion is successful, so Macbeth is killed as well. So this is a play, a very bloody but powerful tale of how ambition and a greed for power can actually overtake us and destroy us. And the reason I'm linking it to Stoicism is because there are these three fates, these three witches, which is quite closely interlinked with this idea of the three fates in Stoicism. And in fact, this runs through Greek philosophy and many different Greek myths and legends. So let's have a look at the concept of a play, because usually we're looking at novels. A play is slightly different to a novel, but it's similar to an audiobook because it's very much a shared experience. So you don't do it alone necessarily. There's an audience of people listening at the same time as you, experiencing the voice, if you like, of the author simultaneously, but in a myriad of different ways, because obviously everyone's coming to the story from their own personal experiences. And of course, the words in the play are then built on by the actors, the director, and further enhanced by costumes, lighting, scenery, etc. So this also has an influence in terms of a play on how the audience reacts to it. A little bit of history about Macbeth. You've got King James I at the time, so there's this playwright Shakespeare, and he's wanting to impress the king. And King James is on the throne, and he's fearful because he understands there's a plot and they're out to get him off the throne, and he is very fearful of what's about to happen to him. Recently, there was the gunpowder plot that tried to blow up the Houses of Parliament, and of course he's feeling under attack. And then this playwright comes along, Shakespeare, and wants to endear himself to the king, quite rightly so, because that's going to enable more of his work. If he's in with the king, that's going to enable more of his work to be funded and therefore promoted. And so he writes this play, Macbeth. In Macbeth, we have the three fates, the three witches, and these three witches feed into King James's passion and obsession with the supernatural. He was very scared of the idea of the supernatural. In fact, he was present at most of the witch hunts in England and most of the persecutions towards what were assumed to be witches. And the fear of witches at this time in the early 1600s was huge. It was at its height. So let's think about this in terms of themes, as we do in many of our stories. And in this play, the theme is, there are many themes, but one of the significant themes is centered around these three witches who are tied into this moire, this idea of, in Greek mythology, of sister goddesses who dictate the destinies of all mortals. They represent birth, life, and death. Their roles are one who spins the thread of life, one who measures the length of life, and one who snips life and therefore signals death. In Macbeth, the three witches are very much offering up a prediction of what could happen in Macbeth's life. And he chooses to run with this, interpret this to his own end. And of course, we do see throughout the play that he has leaps of conscience, and then he immerses himself in the greed and the obsession with power and his wife's dictation that they should, drive forward and become king and queen. So it's a very complicated story in so much as he's pulled one way and the other with his conscience. But essentially, this central symbolism of the fates, of something dictating the path, as it were, ties in with Stoicism very well. And these fates have profoundly influenced literature, and they span mythological retelling across the centuries. So here in Macbeth, they are dictating his destiny, they are prophesying his rise and his fall, and they represent uncontrollable cosmic forces that are toying with free human will. Now, if we look at how the Stoics look at this idea of the three fates, theirs is more of an allegorical approach. So rather than them viewing the fates as arbitrary mystical forces, the fates for the Stoics represents the logos. They represent universal cause and effect. So what the Stoics are saying is there is a natural order, a natural way, the logos, and they're saying that these three symbols, if you like, are championing an active acceptance of this reality. What will be, and they are there to remind us of that and also ensure that we succumb to that. Understand that there is a natural order and acceptance is the key, and also an understanding of how we react to that and a tempering of how we react to that. So Greek mythology is seeing the fates as uncontrollable deities. The Stoics, however, are interpreting them as a metaphor for an interconnected universe. The Stoic fate asserts that events happen for a reason, but it doesn't mean that we're passive observers. So in Macbeth, the fates are almost dictating the way. Stoic fate is saying, well, yes, this is the way, but our focus is on how you respect that, understand that, and accept that, and then come to temper your reaction to that. So, as Stoics, we understand the outcomes of events are dictated by the order of the cosmos, but how we perceive, how we judge, and how we respond to those is entirely within our circle of control. If we look at our thread of life as individuals, everything that's happened to us, everything we're doing, they're all threads, and they're all woven into one grand unified fabric. What happens to one thread, we realise invariably will affect the cloth, will affect the others, and this creates a chain of cause and effect, which is governed by a rational order. So this amor fati that I talk about each week is the ultimate Stoic goal, the acceptance and the loving of one's fate, not merely to endure those threads, if you like, but to embrace them and understand that they are part of the fabric that is our life. So we are trying here to encourage the embrace of every aspect of our life, misfortunes and fortunes. These are all central and necessary in order for us to be a complete human being that is protecting our inner peace. If we look at Epictetus's three disciplines, that helps us to understand that, because they suggest we should learn to accept our fate by focusing only on what is within our control. Act justly, practice this virtue, and strive for the common good with all our interactions within those threads, the interactions with the people who are bound up into our threads of life, and then pause to question our internal judgments about what the fates hand us, and understand that we can choose how we react to that. When Zeno of Citium found himself shipwrecked, his goods lost, his fortune gone, he wandered into a bookseller's shop and he began reading. Moved by this calm strength of a philosopher he was reading, who, quote, knew nothing yet feared nothing, Zeno came to understand virtue was the only true good. External things, health, wealth, pleasure, even death, are neither good nor evil. They are threads woven together that make up the fabric of our life. So going back to Macbeth, I'm suggesting here that Shakespeare may well have been aware of this idea of the interconnected universe, the threads running together to make this fabric. The three witches may represent the power of the cosmos, the divine logos, that which is made up of all these threads. What happens to one thread affects the other threads. So the witches set out the prediction, but ultimately it is Macbeth that has to decide whether he takes the path that is dishonouring his higher self in order to make that prediction happen. In order to honour our higher self, we have choices. And in Stoic philosophy, the fates are dictating, you have a path set out for you. Each thread that has happened is part of your path, your story. But also, you can step back from that, learn to accept and let go of that, and then what will be, will be. All the while, you are practicing the protection of your inner peace. Where Macbeth began, he dabbled in the idea of murder. He suggested to his wife, "What shall I do? This is an option." And she ran with it. Not only did she run with it, she actively pursued it. And even when he had a crisis of conscience, he listened to his wife and he decided, I've got a choice to make here. And ultimately, she paid the price, the ultimate sacrifice for encouraging the wrong choice, and so did he. Of course, it had to end that way because Macbeth was practicing regicide, which is a word that means killing a king. And in this time, in the 17th century, there was something called the divine right of kings. And what that meant was kings on earth are the closest representation of God on earth that we can possibly have. They are the closest to God of any human. And this fed into James I's narrative because obviously he felt attacked. He was a king. And the Catholics were plotting to kill him. So there comes along this play, and this feeds into this story. How do we relate this to our lives today? Well, this idea of the natural order is a message for us. To live in accordance with nature means just that. To live in accordance with the whole. To see oneself not just as a fragment, but an organ as part of the living world. The universe itself is alive. It's something that's animating everything, and this logos I talk about is the reason that governs it. So within this web, if you like, lies our freedom. We have the choice, the faculty of moral choice. We cannot control what happens to us, but we can control the choices we make within the situations that happen to us. So freedom itself is not lying within those threads, those changing events, but in how we adapt to them and change ourselves. The cloth is woven, as it were. How we then choose to perceive that cloth is within our circle of control. So, of course, if we look at ourselves, individually speaking, our souls, as it were, they are a microcosm of the cosmos itself, of a grander, larger story. But they are, if we choose, guiding us by divine reason. Epictetus said, "You are a distinct portion of the essence of God, and you contain a certain part of him within yourself." So, as you know, we have a journal task, and today's journal task is how we relate this to our lives. You can note in your journals, I anticipate the day's challenges with equanimity. I neither am excited about them or I'm either fearful of them. I choose to be accepting of whatever happens. I assess successes and failures equally. I learn accordingly. I reflect on impermanence so that I can deepen my gratitude of the gift I have, that is life. And I use my journal to clarify my thoughts, strengthen my will, and record my progress. I hope that made sense. And thanks for coming. I'll see you next time. Hey, Stephanie here. Thank you for listening to the Female Stoic podcast. It is an honour, and I just want to say I really appreciate you being here. It's amazing the power of women in literature and the Stoic messages they have to share. Please, if you can, return the favour by spreading their words and sharing this podcast far and wide, so more of us can benefit from their wisdom. And don't forget to leave a review if you like what you heard. See you next time.